I'm Ryan Jeffrey, and this is the Passionate About OSS podcast. Today's is Ep004, and we have James Crawshaw with us. So the purpose of this podcast is to shine a light on some of the brilliant minds in the OSS and telco industry. So James, part of the reason for getting James on today is I'm just fascinated with the movements of the industry. It's heading off in so many different directions, and James' content around that is some of the best out there. James is Principal Analyst at Omdia. He's been with Heavy Reading and Omdia for around about 7 years in total as an ICT analyst. So his understanding of the industry goes back a way, and specialises in OSS, telco, cloud and IT. And James tends to be my go-to contact for industry movement. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you on. I guess going back into the formative years, you did a Bachelor of Science and Master of Electronic Engineering in Manchester, but the career seems to have started in Argentina, of all places. So tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Oh, yes, that's going back into the mists of time, isn't it? I'm born and brought up in the UK and studied engineering at Manchester. But then, like a lot of young people, wanted to travel the world and see places. So I spent a year in Spain working as an English teacher, and then from there went to Argentina, where I essentially worked as a consultant. First of all, doing quality assurance, ISO 9000, and then moved to another firm doing logistics consulting. That's what I was doing out there.
Yeah, and an Englishman in Argentina. 10 years earlier, I guess that would have been a lot more tricky. But, were there still any ongoing tensions at that time when you were there?
Not that I came across, no. I mean, to be honest, I think most people associate the Falklands conflict with the dictatorship that Argentina was under at the time. And so they sort of look back on that period as a somewhat embarrassing time. And also, the Falklands themselves don't really have any economic significance. I think it was the Argentine writer Borges who said that the British and the Argentines fighting over the Falkland Islands was like two bald men fighting over a comb, which shows you what he thought of it.
It seems that way too for someone removed so far away here in Australia, but that sounds like a great analogy. So what led you down the path of being an analyst from those early origins?
Started out as an engineer, as I said, but then I moved back to the UK and wanted to live and work in London. And there aren't that many engineering jobs in London, but there's a lot of financial services jobs. Yeah. So I ended up ultimately working as an equity analyst, following companies, essentially trying to guess if their share prices would go up or not. And the kind of companies that I was following were technology companies.
Yeah, and that led into telco, and I guess was Citi the first real foray into the telco market specifically?
Well, Citigroup, that was the first sort of sell-side investment bank where I was part of a team covering the telecom equipment companies. Back in the day, it was Alcatel, Ericsson, Nokia, a lot of smaller companies as well, but most of them have disappeared or been acquired. And even Alcatel, which was quite a big player back then, ultimately was also acquired.
And was that an easy transition, or was there a steep learning curve in making that transition?
Well, I guess, Ryan, it was still pretty early in my career, so you can make those transitions fairly easily. I enjoyed the excitement of the stock market, traveling to meet companies, presenting to investors. So it was fun, and when you're having fun, transitions are relatively easy.
Indeed. And did you have any great mentors or guidance in those early days?
Oh, I wish. No, I mostly had to sort of muddle through on my own.
So tell us a little bit about the tech analyst industry. So the kind of things that it does, the purpose it serves, and methods of delivery and so forth. The kind of things
Yeah.
that keep you busy during each day that you're working these days.
Yes, well, from the outside, it might seem a little bit opaque, but essentially, what the industry analyst role, it's a sort of blend of business media and consulting. So at one end, it's not very different from the trade press. In fact, a lot of analysts start out writing for websites, writing about technology news, but the analyst role within an industry analyst firm, it can also be about providing advice, consulting. So advice to the buyers of technology about what the best options are, advice to the sellers of technology about how best to position their marketing pitches, or whether they should even bother addressing a particular market. And to do this, my sort of day-to-day activities, there's a lot of reading of news, of trade news, a lot of talking with companies to learn about their technology solutions. I listen to a lot of webinars to try and understand what the challenges are for the service providers, the telecom operators. And then I have to spend a lot of time writing. I have to produce reports on topics. I have to write blogs, the occasional white paper. I have to prepare slides for conferences and for webinars. And the content that I produce is typically delivered through a website like the Omdia website, or one of our media portals like Light Reading, or sometimes the content, if it's a white paper, then the sponsor themselves will distribute that content via their own social media channels.
Yeah, so it's a multi-pronged approach, really, isn't it? And multiple different purposes and delivery mechanisms, it seems.
Yeah, that's right.
So tell us a little bit about Omdia and before that, Heavy Reading, which I guess is under the same umbrella group.
Yeah. So, well, the Omdia brand, that was launched at the beginning of last year. The parent company for Omdia is a company called Informa, which is essentially an events and educational publishing business. It's a listed company, listed in the UK on the London Stock Exchange. They acquired Ovum, the telecom and tech industry research firm, back in 2007. The idea was, they wanted to diversify more into business intelligence and not be so reliant upon events. And over the years, they made other acquisitions, made a lot more acquisitions for events businesses, and also some media businesses. So they bought Penton Media, UBM, which is their big London-listed rival. And they also bought Light Reading, which is where I came into the organization because I was part of Light Reading's research arm, Heavy Reading. And then more recently, Informa decided to bulk up their technology research side by acquiring the bulk of IHS, another industry research firm, from a financial data company called Market, who had several years beforehand decided to do its own diversification and buy IHS. But Market kept some of the IHS businesses, but they sold the tech research side to Informa. And so Informa couldn't use the IHS brand, and decided, instead of continuing to use the Ovum brand, they would introduce a new brand that reflected the greater scale and the inclusion of IHS, etc. And so that's what Omdia was. And as you said, Omdia includes the Heavy Reading research, which was the research side of Light Reading, and other brands like Tractica, which was an AI research firm that they bought. And in total now, Omdia is about 400 analysts. That makes it about the third biggest industry analyst firm out there, after Gartner, which is the £800 gorilla, and IDC. And then after that comes Omdia.
Yeah, and that's quite a consolidation, and obviously a lot of talent in the team as well, based on the amazing content that I read coming from each of those different vehicles.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
And tell us a little bit about the types of customer that you service, or the ideal customer for you. That I guess that again would be multi-threaded.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture. For Omdia overall, it's a mixture of enterprise customers, their IT departments. It's also telecom operators, what we would describe as the buy side, the people who are looking to make technology decisions about what to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
Then we also serve the sell side, so the vendors of technology solutions. They're looking to get insights into what their customers are thinking, so they can best position their solutions and their offerings. And then we also have customers who are in consulting firms, and they're often looking to use our data to support their own work, to support their own advice, and the presentations they make to their clients.
And I'd imagine that you spend a majority of your time right on the bleeding edge of technology and industry movements. So.
Well, there's not much point writing about 2G these days. That's not going to sell many reports.
So true.
And yeah, we are, like everybody, we're always looking for the new thing. But sometimes being too bleeding edge can actually be bad for business if no one is prepared to sponsor research on a topic. Then obviously that's not particularly attractive. But yeah, you've got to strike a balance. Nobody's interested about yesterday's technology. They want to hear about what's happening now and what's going to change the market in the next 12 months. So it's not sort of purely academic thinking about blue sky research about what might happen in 10 years' time. That's interesting to think about, but not necessarily so commercial.
And the tech seems to be proliferating so quickly. It makes my head spin. It amazes me the breadth and depth that you cover. Things like the OSS market report, the report on self-organizing networks, crossing into 5G, and other reports that are upcoming shortly that we've talked about. So how do you manage to stay up to date on all of those things?
Well, I guess it's a case of standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. I read what the trade press puts out. That gets me a leg up. Then I read what what competitors are saying. I read what the vendor community is saying. I try and get insights from the buy side as well. They don't tend to write so much, so it's harder to get those insights. But you talk to them, and back in the day, you'd go to conferences and meet with them. But there is simply too much news, too much information out there to read it all. So it's about applying a filter and a sort of 80-20 rule. You try and get an understanding of 80% of the issue, of the theme, of the topic, and you can get that pretty much by reading 20% of the material that's out there.
Yeah. And I'd imagine you'd have a pretty amazing little black book of connections and contacts as well.
Well, it's a black book we all probably have. It's called LinkedIn. I don't, and obviously, email systems are pretty good at remembering people's names and things like that. But
much better than I am.
Yeah, I am heavily reliant on LinkedIn. It's a fantastic tool.
Yeah, exactly, and I use it heavily too I see myself as somewhat of a connector of people and ideas and projects and so forth, and the ability to find people that you may have worked with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, may have gone through multiple different locations, but staying in touch with them and their specialized skill sets, I find a really valuable tool. So given that you are collecting from all sorts of different places, so the leads, the primary, secondary research, the conferences, all those different aspects of collating and then bringing that data together to deliver and write, do you have a systematic approach and maybe even tool sets that you use to bring all that together?
Well, I'm not sure there's any tool sets necessarily, and I guess there's some sort of systematic approach, although I haven't really thought about it before. I tend to prefer primary research to secondary. So talking to people, interviews, surveys, etc., is usually the more interesting work. But you do have to do some secondary research, reading material that other people have produced in order to know in the first place what the right questions are to ask in those surveys or those interviews. conferences is a great way of doing research. Certainly when they were face-to-face and physical, you could hear the presentation, you could see what questions other people in the room were asking, you could chew the cud in the exhibition booths with both buy side and sell side. I have to say, online events don't have that same richness. You're not quite as focused. It's very easy to get distracted by email, and you don't have the same interactions. It's not quite as much fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess on the plus side, or maybe it's the negative still, is I guess there's nowhere near as much travel as there was, say, a little over 12 months ago.
Yeah, and that's certainly good for the environment. But on the other hand, travel broadens the mind. Even being on an aeroplane gives you some downtime when you can read a book that you might not necessarily have got around to reading otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's those person-to-person interactions as well. They do make a difference. It's not quite the same when it's all online, but we're making the best of it today, hey Ryan?
Indeed. Absolutely. Amazing technology that we're getting to utilize.
Absolutely.
So have your approaches changed much over the 20 or so years that you've been in the analyst industry?
Well, I guess when I started out as an equity analyst, it was much more about financial information. Yeah. And I do like, where possible, to go to financial information. It tends to be reliable, it's concrete, and even if people's forecasts are guesswork, at least the historical financial data is a sort of source of truth. Well, unless they're some sort of dodgy company, and then they usually end up going to jail. So when you're just writing about industry themes, and there's no, and you're covering private companies, and you're sort of trying to squeeze out of them information about how big their revenues are, etc., that can be a lot harder. You have to make a lot of guesses, and obviously take things that companies say with a pinch of salt. So I prefer looking at public companies that provide good disclosure, rather than huge conglomerates that don't break out any detail. Because often what I'm covering are very small parts of their businesses, and even though it's immaterial to the whole, they're still reluctant to sort of break out the numbers, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that your origins within the financial analyst industry, did that give you probably a better grounding to do the kind of work that you do now? Is it more your forte than perhaps some of the other tech writers that you sit alongside?
Not necessarily, no. I think that there are some people in this role like me who've got that sort of background, and they're very numbers oriented, and they like to get that financial data. But there are others who are. I think the other knack, the other trick is being able to write clearly, to articulate a complicated technology matter, and to put it into simple terms that other people can understand. There's so many buzzwords. There's so much obfuscation that goes on in this industry, sort of cutting through all of that noise and saying, okay, that's what they mean, when they talk about network as a service, or whatever it is. That's a lot of the value that's added. So that it's not just the financial side. I think you have to be a good communicator in written form as well as spoken.
Yeah, and yet I tend to find that the financial aspect of it seems to be the really big soundbite. It's the takeaway that often gets people interested in a report in the first place. Would that be true?
Well, I mean, the sort of very common approach that you'll see is people put out reports, say the market for technology X is Y billion dollars, and it's going to grow at a compound average growth rate of Z.274%. That's a very standard formula, and it's successful because the people who make product X are desperate for some sort of validation that their market is big and growing, so they can go to their boss and get marketing budget or R&D budget or headcount budget or what have you. I think that's of less interest to the buy side community, the service providers. They're interested in understanding, is technology X really important? Do I really need to add it to my existing portfolio of systems that I've got? Is to a technology X simply an evolution of technology W that I already have, and it's simply going to be another feature set? So they're more interested in understanding the real dynamics rather than just hockey stick curves, which show something growing at a very fast rate, out of nowhere. Which when you look at the industry in aggregate, the telecom industry is not showing hockey stick growth.
Yes.
and their capex budgets are not going up exponentially either. And so any niche product that you see that is supposedly growing at these rates, it's usually because it's simply displacing something else, and that in aggregate there aren't many of these very fast growing opportunities.
Yeah, and having written some of those types of reports myself, I guess I always treat those numbers with somewhat of a grain of salt. So I guess a lot of the buy side, as you say, would treat them with a grain of salt. So they're a great soundbite and quite catchy. That I think some people see through them, surely.
Well, I'm sure the buy side does indeed.
Yeah, right. And if any of the fundamentals really changed over the years, the way of doing business, the way of going to market, what you deliver to market?
Well, I mean, back in the day, originally there would have been actual physical reports published and sent to clients and printed. And obviously now everything is electronic.
And so much free content available these days. I guess that makes it harder too.
Yeah, there's a lot of free, but then you
get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for, and obviously, free is always in inverted commas. Nobody's doing this for fun. If it's free, it's normally there's an agenda. It's paid for advertising, and the content formats have changed. You're doing a podcast now. That's not something that we were looking at 20 years ago. Webinars are so much more common now. It wasn't long ago that to listen into a webinar, they sometimes asked you to dial a telephone number at the same time, so you get the video coming on your computer through a web browser, but you'd actually have to phone a telephone line to listen to the audio. That's fortunately a thing of the past. Everything is a bit more seamless nowadays, and I think people's attention spans are shorter now, so they'd almost prefer to watch a video than to read an article, and I think that's I tend to think that's a bad thing, and one thing that I found very interesting about Amazon is that when they have meetings, when they have business meetings, they don't just sort of waltz in there and then show a few PowerPoint slides and chat around. They write something down in advance that everybody there sits and reads collectively and thinks about, and I think that leads to a much better response. So I still find the written word focuses the mind and helps to communicate complex things and saves time in the end rather than sitting around chewing the cud. Write it down. Express what you really mean.
Yeah, I really like the idea. I hadn't heard that referred to before, but I think that's wonderful, given the number of meetings that I've sat through that have just meandered around. I think it's a great idea. Yeah. And so similarly, I guess you have a lot better tools for understanding like click-throughs and the SEO type tools that maybe you wouldn't have had with the print literature in the past, that you would get better feedback or maybe more quantitative type feedback on the work that you do and publish.
Yeah, we do. We get feedback on what reports are more successful than others. And we also collect a lot of feedback. We collect a lot of information on inbound inquiries.
Mm.
So in order to decide, what to write next, I might look at what reports have been successful in the past and do an iteration of that. Or I might look at what sort of inbound inquiries if we've been getting. What is it that people are trying to figure out that they're not getting served by the rest of the market on a particular topic? They want to learn more, and that can be a useful form of insight.
And so that helps you steer where the future content that you look to develop?
Yeah, exactly. So we do get, if I get an inquiry from a customer, and then it'll, that pops up on my radar, and I think, okay, that's something we haven't written about. That's something they're interested in. I do a quick Google, see if there's any other content out there, and obviously they've already done that themselves. There isn't any, and then if I get the same inquiry again from another customer, I realize, okay, this is a theme that's worth pursuing. So some of the reports that I did last year were on that basis. They were off the back of client queries.
Yeah, they're certainly fascinating topics for me. That's for sure. So generally, can you foresee the content that will be successful in advance, if you kind of got that ability to predict to an extent after all these years in the industry?
I think you know what the topics are that are important, that are under researched, and they tend to be the ones that you're trying to get your head around yourself. I mean, a lot of the time, analysts write reports for their own benefit because they're trying to understand or learn about something, and they're not alone. They're trying to learn about things that they're hearing from vendors, and they're hearing from the operators themselves, and there's some confusion. A new standard and new technology. Does it really pose a security risk? What security risks? What are the mitigating factors? Essentially, that's how it works.
And is that what still inspires you? You've been in the industry for a while now. Well, I guess the first question is, are you still inspired by the industry? And if so, what aspects still excite you?
Yeah, I mean, you never stop learning. I continue to peel the onion on telecom technology. I never seem to get to the bottom, and things seem to move on. Oftentimes it's just people using new words to describe something that existed before. So a lot of the time it's just about trying to figure out, oh, that's what they mean.
Yes.
And it's a big industry. It's an important industry. It's not necessarily growing double digits, but nor is the automotive industry, and that's also a fascinating industry where things are changing. We're moving to autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and the communications industry plays a role, not necessarily in electric vehicles, but certainly in helping to guide autonomous vehicles. So I think there's lots more opportunities for the communications industry to add value, and that's what we're all focused on.
Yeah, and that possibly partly explains the proliferation in our industry as well. We're probably diving deeper into those other industries, whereas years ago it would have been we provided a telephone service and that serviced all the different industries. But these days now with healthcare and with autonomous vehicles, we're actually getting deeper into their technology stack. They're becoming e-businesses.
Yeah, I mean, many operators have got sort of consulting and IT services operations that are trying to get more embedded in the enterprise. The plain vanilla connectivity is to some extent a commodity. So in order to have customer stickiness, in order to differentiate versus your competitors, you do need to go a bit further. You do need more industry knowledge and insight and specialism. So in the enterprise market, that's key.
Yeah. So what does the future hold for OSS and telco, and how are you positioning for it? What do you see on the radar? Is it a long-term radar or a mid-term radar?
I think there needs to be more rationalization of the IT systems that are out there. There's just simply too much sprawl. I think there could be more use of general enterprise IT applications instead of everything being very much telecom industry specific, because general enterprise is obviously it's a bigger market. You're going to get economies of scale, and hence cheaper solutions than telco specific solutions. I think more systems are going to be moving into public cloud, and ultimately the newer systems that operators buy, they're going to be looking to buy them as a service, software as a service. So those are the sort of general themes and topics that I see.
And similarly, I guess the people that connect with you, the customers, the people making inbound inquiries, are they identifying any particular pain points, problem points that you feel are still really big problems to solve for? I know you talked about the IT sprawl, but any others that really jump out?
Dealing with technical debt, dealing with the legacy of IT systems that have been that have this sort of ossified IT infrastructure that's come from multiple acquisitions that operators have made over the years, and they've kind of stuck it all together with sticky tape in order to make it work. They've consolidated brands, they consolidated sales, their customer facing websites and things like that, but a lot of the back end systems are still not integrated. So more work to be done there.
Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about some of the macro trends. Are there any real hidden gems that you've come across recently that we should all know about but don't yet?
Hidden gems.
And that could be company, technology, projects, interesting ways of doing things that some of the telcos have been doing.
Yeah, that's
OSS
a tough
vendors
one.
for that matter.
Yeah, it's a tough one, Ryan. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call out any particular OSS vendor. There are some that are better than others. There are some that are, I guess, the ones that it's this move to public cloud, which seems to be the key differentiator now. The ones that have early on embraced new software architecture concepts like cloud native, and then that's enabled them to not just put their solutions into public cloud, but to leverage the native capabilities of public cloud, the databases, etc., that are native to those platforms, to get solutions that can scale faster, scale more efficiently, and I suppose ultimately be more economic for the service provider. It seems to be that cloud native and public cloud, those are the key themes and topics.
And one of the other areas that I guess I look to is I really see OSS as a mechanism for, we capture enormous amounts of data but don't necessarily make the best use of it. So I guess the analytics technologies, AI, machine learning, potentially coming in and making better use of that. So yeah, that's an area that you cover as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I've written about AI in the past. I have a colleague who focuses more specifically on AI and how it's applied in network management. It does seem as though everybody, has sprinkled a bit of AI into their solutions. Yes. It's not always clear when you look under the hood whether it's whether there really is some sort of ongoing learning capability, or it's simply some static rules that have been created. Yeah. But it's a little bit of the hype and the buzz has come out of the AI topic in the telco industry, but in the wider industry, I think AI continues to evolve and make advances, and I think those will trickle through into telecoms too. But it's not a panacea. You don't just plug in an AI box to solve your problems. It's part of it's just one tool in many.
Yeah, so nothing that really jumps out at you that you've come across in your travels over the last little while that it looks like being groundbreaking in that space?
No one silver bullet that I've come across just yet, but I keep looking, Ryan.
No doubt, uncovering those rocks, and that probably leads into the next question around. So, I guess even the best of the best in this industry really doesn't know everything there is to know, and with all the rapid change. So, yeah, you analysts must be amazing at speed learning. So, is there any particular place that you look the great learning resources out there that help you? I know you talked about reaching out to people, but are there any sources of content that you really look upon?
I mean, I mentioned earlier some of the sources are things like, I look at the trade news, obviously things like reading. I read fairly diligently. I mean, search engines are a great resource. They'll take you to a lot of information, and I think then it's just a case of skimming through and quickly figuring out what of those search results are just waffle and vendor marketing, and which ones are actually providing some honest insight. And it's about applying that filter. That I guess is the skill that you have to learn in order to make the learning and the reading process more efficient.
And do you think that's the key trait, or one of the key traits of the highest achievers you've worked alongside?
I think diligence, thoroughness. You've got to I mean, in terms of the full package of an analyst, one has to maintain integrity. You can't just be a shill writing for vendors, otherwise you quickly get found out. And I think you mustn't get too full of yourself. We're all learning, and it's about sharing that knowledge and learning from others. Nobody has the answer to everything, so I think you need to be mindful of that.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you hold any beliefs that appear contrarian to what others hold around the industry, whether that's the analyst industry or even myths and ideas that the rest of us tend to hold true that you just don't have, you believe are myths?
Well, I tend to be quite skeptical about some of the potential.
You're an engineer, so it's by nature, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical about how much of a difference 5G will make, or IoT, or things like network slicing. Are they really going to lead to any significant change in growth for the industry overall? That's not necessarily a contrarian view, but it isn't the message that the vendor community would like to hear. They're all about trying to persuade the service providers to buy today, buy now before your competitors do, buy now and launch these services or these capabilities. Otherwise, you might miss out. And so I'm a little bit skeptical about that.
Yeah, I guess that's a wonderful trait too for what you do, is to treat things with a grain of salt. I just noticed, for example, this morning there was a reference to the CEO of Equinix saying that MEC is a little bit overblown, that people are going and spruiking the edge compute a lot harder than he thinks it will really take off just at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, I presume he's got his own angle there, in that he'd much rather that people hosted applications in Equinix's data centers rather than replicating that infrastructure. But I share, I sympathise with his point. We often talk about the importance of latency, but there's a lot of data centers that are already located in small towns around the world. How much additional benefit and latency are you really going to get by moving that compute 100 meters, 200 meters closer to an enterprise? If you think about the entire end-to-end latency budget, probably a lot more of it's going to be somewhere else in the chain, in some firewall or some connection to a centralized cloud element somewhere. So yeah, think he's probably got a point there that over-investing in MEC is a risk.
Yeah, or overinflating the hype around it, perhaps, as well. And I imagine that some of that is underpinned by some of the data that he would have access to as well.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we're coming towards the end of the podcast here. Is there anything else that I should have really asked you that I've failed to so far?
You should have asked me what my favourite thing about Passionate About OSS is.
Oh, yeah, tell me more. Always willing to take on it. I have to remain humble, absolutely.
Well, no, I just wanted to say it's a fantastic resource, Ryan. I've been reading and following the blog for several years now. Big fan of your work. When I was first took on this role or my role at Heavy Reading to cover OSS, I bought your book, Mastering Your OSS, which I found very, very useful.
Oh, so you're the one.
Yeah, do you want it back? That was a really helpful resource, and there are not many publications out there that address this space. There's one other that I came across called Fundamentals of EMS, NMS, and OSS by a guy called Sathyan. But otherwise, it's a fairly undercovered space, and an important one. I think the management of telecom networks, telecom systems. That is critical to delivering the quality of service, the efficiency that service providers are trying to achieve. So it's good to see you covering the space so well.
Yeah, I guess the one of the points about the book is there's a few other books out there, but I tended to find before writing mine that a lot of them were about technologies, and as you know, the technologies tend to disappear after 3 months, 6 months. So the books tend to have a relatively short shelf life. So it was definitely one of my intentions was to make it more process systems and methodologies that hopefully last a little bit longer than the technologies themselves.
Excellent.
All right. So it's been. Where can people reach out to you so if they found the topics of conversation interesting today and they'd love to reach out to you? Where can they find you, James?
Oh well, as I said earlier, LinkedIn. That's the one.
Yep. Fantastic. So it's been a great pleasure having a chat, as it always is. I always find the discussions with you really fascinating, and I love reading the work that you put out. So the topics are right in my wheelhouse. So keep up the great work, James.
Yeah, likewise, Ryan. I look forward to reading your next blog and hearing the other podcasts in this series.
Yeah, all right. Fantastic. So thank you also for the audience who's been listening in, and look forward to getting another podcast out shortly. Thanks again, James.
Cheers. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks for listening to the Passionate About OSS podcast. You can find more episodes, more than 2,500 blogs, and our contact details over at passionateaboutoss.com.